All right, welcome to NNP Symposium for day 2. We had some great presentations yesterday. We got some more on tap for today. This 10 o'clock session will feature Jesse Kraft, Resolute Americana Curator at the ANS. And we have a great topic here. The Continental Dollar is just one of these endlessly fascinating topics within American numismatics. The coin itself says, I'm a dollar, I'm American, I'm representing the Continental Congress. So the coin says one thing, but then you start looking into the record and the documentation, and you start finding some different things. Really the most compelling question surrounding this object is, was it made in Europe or was it made in the US? And people have been tussling with this issue for a long time. And so far there's no smoking gun either way. So there's interesting arguments on both sides for this. Jesse most recently did some research work in Europe and is going to share that with us today. So with that, Jesse, I will turn it over to you.
Excellent. Morning, everyone. Thank you, Len. Before I officially get started, I would like to thank the Eric P. Newman Numismatic Educational Society. As Len just noted, I did spend about 2 weeks in Europe, in Germany primarily, in Nuremberg, Neuwied, Koblenz, and Cologne, trying to figure out a little bit more about Elias Gervais, or Eli Gervais, as I'll get into. He does have a few different variations of spellings for his name, the potential engraver of the Continental Dollar. All right, so I have a few small objectives here. First is to trace the life of Elias Gervais. That's going to be the majority of this presentation. I know this is a numismatic symposium, but there's not going to be too many pictures of coins. There will be towards the end. It's going to be a fair amount of documents, some pictures of places, so on and so forth. Second objective is to introduce some works. Again, I'm not going to get too far into this. The primary objective of this presentation is more biographical than it is showcasing his works. But of course, we will get into that. And of course, a brief analyzation of his potential role in the production of the Continental Dollar. So first, Elias Gervais, who was he? He was a Petierstecker and Münzmeister, which translates to seal engraver, and mint master. Is also, is primarily an engraver. As we'll see, he was born on January 23rd of 1721 in Geneva, one of the Swiss cantons in what is now Switzerland. He is the son of Gideon Gervais, who was an enamel painter, and Elizabeth Mallet. He was baptized as Protestant on February 3rd. That doesn't necessarily sound that important, but it does kind of come into play later on, the Protestantism, by Spiet Senebier, which isn't important, but he has a really cool name, so I added that. But as I have in parentheses here, he lived as a Moravian. So that's something that we'll get into, and does actually play very large into his life and into the potential role of the Continental Dollar. Most of his career was in Germany, but his primary language was French, as someone who was born and raised in Geneva. And a lot of the places, as we'll see, that he went to, most of the people, or sometimes a majority of the people there, were French-speaking people as well. So despite the fact that this was in Germany, a lot of what I had to deal with was actually French. So as we see here, there's at least 4 different spellings of his name. Elias Gervais, or Gervais, or however you want to pronounce that. The top one is what a lot of numismatists over the past few years have been seeing his name spelled as. The second one, Elias Gervais, is actually how he himself spelled his name in most documents, but not all the time. This third one is another variation with the X. This seems to be more of the Swiss spelling. And then the bottom one, Elias Gervais with the X at the end, is actually how how his name was spelled when he was born and how he was baptized. So he had various names to his spellings, some of which were official, some of which he used primarily throughout his own life, and some of which he's more known by today. So it's kind of interesting. On the right here, this is, of course, we're talking 18th century, so we didn't have photography, but this is an actual silhouette of Elias Gervais. I found it in the archives in Neuwied, and it was listed as silhouette number 93. I don't know who numbers 1 through 92 were, but silhouette number 93 was Elias Gervais. So this is as close to an actual photograph as we can get to him. That's his actual silhouette, and I think that's absolutely amazing. So birth records. I have 2 birth records here. The one on the left was sent to me from the State Museum in Geneva. So this is his official birth record. You can see all the way on the bottom left, 2 up from the bottom left, we see Elias Gervais, spelled with the X at the end, and Eli without the AS, and Eli or Eli. So this is his actual baptismal record from Geneva. The one on the right is a certified copy of an extract from the records. As you can see, the record on the left has this symbol at the top of the record. The one on the right has the same symbol. The one on the right actually was from 1746. So he was born in 1721. Then 1746, he requests a copy, a certified copy. And as we'll see, that's when he actually starts to travel. So the one on the left is when he was actually baptized. The one on the right is when he's about to travel and collecting the documents and stuff like that. So this is his apprenticeship contract. It's 3 pages long. I'm going to go page by page and kind of just give you some brief highlights. It was signed on May 15th, 1734. So he's 13 years old in Geneva still and about to become an apprentice. The contract was signed between his father, again, Gideon Gervais, and master goldsmiths and gem setters, the Benet brothers, Jacques and Jean-Louis of Geneva. So Elias Gervais was with the Benet brothers for a period of 5 years, and their role for him was to, quote, instruct said apprentice in piety, good manners, to show and teach him everything that depends on our said profession. Elias Gervais was obligated to pay 55 thalers for tools and supplies, and then an additional 2 louis d'ors, which are gold coins, specifically for needles and pins. He was to pay the first half, 27.5 thalers, plus the 2 louis d'ors in advance in the presence of a notary and witness, and then the second half about halfway through the apprenticeship. And this was in fact paid about just over 2.5 years into the apprenticeship. There are 3 postscripts. So you can see this is the 3rd page at the top of the page. It kind of ends the contract. Then there's 3 little postscripts that are written at a later date by a different hand. The first one acknowledges the receipt of the second half of the installment. The second one is the important one here. It was written on June 30th, 1739, and it notes that Gervais, quote, has completed his apprenticeship, has performed his duty with all the prudence and fidelity required, and has been very constant in his matters and zeal, end quote. And then the third one is just from a few days later, and it acknowledges receipt of the document, so it's more logistical. So 1739, he has completed his apprenticeship as a goldsmith and gem setter. Then he begins to travel. He first goes to this place called Montmirail. Just before this, he experienced an evangelical conversion to the Moravian Church with an encounter with a man named Malter, who was an enigmatic person in Central Europe at the time, and he had an interesting run-in with him and changed his religious views. Gervais spent an unknown amount of time in this place. In the early 1840s, it was at least a month, but it could have been a few years. There are actually two Montmirails. There's a bigger one in France, just I think west of Paris. That's not the one that he went to. He went to this other one that's in Switzerland. So in the map on the top right, you can see a little subset on the top left of the map that shows a complete map of Switzerland. And if you see the little nub all the way to the left on the bottom left, that's Geneva, that's where he was born. This red dot is where he went to. And then in the big part of the map, you can see he went to the kind of northern part of this lake. So by 1740, this place was the center of the Moravian diaspora for French-speaking Swiss. Usually today we hear the word diaspora and we usually think of it as meaning people who have left their homeland and kind of spread usually globally. Here that does not refer to this. Instead, it refers to a small renewal groups that operated within the existing churches of Europe. So kind of like these, not necessarily like second tier or second rate, but just on the fringes of the official doctrines of European churches at the time. In the 18th century Europe, there were several hundred that were operating. And the Moravian Church was the first large-scale Protestant missionary movement in the world. And, you know, we think of the Moravian Church, or at least, you know, before I did, before really getting into this, I wasn't necessarily familiar with the Moravian Church. So I thought that there was some, you know, mysticism sort of group or whatever, but they're a leading religious sect at this time. And even Methodism actually is a derivative of Moravians. So, you know, it's not something that's too far out there. Evidence again suggests that his stay was as short as 1 month in 1744, but could have been a little bit longer. From there, he goes to this place called Hernhag. He arrived there on May 17th, 1747. We know that he slept on a straw mattress in the hallway for 6 weeks, and his only available occupation was as a gardener. So it was a little bit of a rough patch when he was just getting there. He was officially received into the congregation about 2 months later on July 30th. Then there's a scandal that was actually kind of brewing by the time he had got there. By circa 1745, based on writings by a person named Christian Zinzendorf, another person named Christian Renatus declared that the souls of all Moravian brothers were female and thus eligible to become brides of Christ. In Hernhag, the brothers began to practice this in reality and actually married one another and heretically mixed the spiritual with the sexual. By 1748, word began to spread, and Nicholas Zinzendorf, who is Christian's father, tried to mitigate the situation and force everyone to pledge allegiance to him. Most of them resisted. By 1750, within just a few years of Gervais' arrival, brothers began to leave Hernhag, and it was completely abandoned by 1753. So this is kind of what's happening, not kind of, this is what's happening in Hernhag at this point in time. To the right, we can actually, I apologize for the low quality of this image, but it is a circa 1750 engraving of Hernhag by Elias Gervais himself. So you can see at the bottom left of the engraving his signature. So this is how he saw it. Again, sorry for the poor quality of that image. He, for a short amount of time, by 1745 goes to Zeist, which is another one of these Moravian diasporas. It's a Dutch Moravian community just outside of Amsterdam. He was sent there by the brothers, you know, kind of in the wake of this scandal. Again, by 1753, Hernhag was completely abandoned. So he was actually one of the last people there, which is kind of interesting. Once he got to Zeist, he lived under very cramped conditions and once again had no work for several months. So then we get to Neuwied. He arrives there in September of 1756. We could see on the map in the upper right, it's kind of in central Western Germany, still kind of near Luxembourg, Belgium, Netherlands, France, and all that, and just north of Geneva, where he was born. Just a few kind of highlights from what he does here. He does spend the rest of his life here, so I'm not going to necessarily dwell too much on Neuwied in particular, but from 1760 to 83, again, he's the Steckerstube of the Neuwied Brethren Church, which is translates to the official seal engraver from 1764 to 1775. He was the Mitmaster of Neuwied and Koblenz, which is a slightly larger town just to the southeast of Neuwied. Anybody was making dies for them by the late 1750s. Over half of Neuwied's population were Genevans and French. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the places that he did go to were Moravian French-speaking communities. And this is a little bit later of an engraving of Neuwied, but it probably didn't look too dissimilar than this when Gervais was there. But take a good look at this, because if Gervais did make the Continental Dollar, this is where he made it. So this is the potential home birthplace of the Continental Dollar. So it's kind of an amazing little shot there. That is, it's right on the Rhine River, the upper middle Rhine, which is a very picturesque place of mountains, rolling mountains. And so it's a really, really beautiful little place. So by this point, he's a master engraver. By the 1760s, considered a master engraver. By July of 1761, he receives his first apprentice, a person named Marc Valère, who is actually his younger cousin. Marc Valère, just a brief synopsis of him, he was born in March of 1749 in Geneva, so he's only 12 years old at this point. He arrives in Neuwied in 1757. So a few years before this, he spent some time in the quote unquote, what was known as the Little Boys Asylum. Just like Gervais' apprenticeship, this was the last 5 years. He was to teach him, quote, everything he knows and can know about engraving without concealing or pretending anything as far as the apprentice can understand, unquote. Gervais was to provide all the tools in return for 10 louis d'ors, so for 10 gold coins. He was given all the tools that he would need for the next 5 years. Valère was supposedly very, very good at his trade, but was successful in his, if you look at his whole life, in the end, he was probably less successful than he would have wanted to have been, and largely for political reasons. He didn't live a destitute life, but he didn't live up to his full potential as an engraver, from what I believe. He eventually died in July of 1826 in Montmirail, which is a place that I already covered. It shows that it's still kind of an important Moravian location at this time. Gervais did have at least 2 other apprentices or journeymen during his career, Jean Rayard and Friedrich Louis Schmutz. This picture to the right is of Montmirail by Marc Valère, circa 1780, so several years after he was Gervais' apprentice. So the Röntgens. I'm not going to get too much into the Röntgens because there is a lot there. Gervais was a, quote, supplier workshop for Röntgen and Kinzig and Deubner. They were furniture makers, clock makers, anything kind of large furniture-y things made out of wood, luxurious. They made it and spread it all throughout the continent of Europe. There's a cap book evidence that exists of the relationship from 1769 to 1775, and then a few later pages that may or may not have to do specifically with the Röntgens. So in addition to making the embossed dies for rosettes, you could see all the kind of like small little metallic things that are on the clock to the right. They made those. He also supplied Röntgen with master drawings. So you can see on the front, there's kind of a little scene. You can't really see it all that well, but it is a scene kind of made out of wood. The paintings and drawings for those, Elias Gervais would have supplied to the Röntgens. He was a very good artist as far as that goes. And he designs for various sorts of marquetry, so the design elements at the bottom, and even the designs for the clock dials themselves. Sometimes very important components of the clocks that are considered Röntgen clocks, Elias Gervais is actually designing them and engraving, or designing them and producing them. A lot of these metallic components before this were actually cast, and Elias Gervais, being an engraver and having access to stamping methods, actually is one of the first workshops known to be minting these pieces. So it's kind of interesting when you think about this section going from cast to minting and engraving, and then 200 years or 10 years later, we have the Gervais reduction machine kind of taking away from the engraving and giving it to the sculptors. So this is similar to the Gervais situation, where you have somebody really advancing their trades and using it wisely. Again, the Röntgens were preeminent manufacturers of luxury wood furnitures, clocks, etc. The Röntgens were lucky in that they operated in a window of European luxury good manufacturing. In the 1760s, there were a lot of supply chain issues from various wars and everything. And then the late 1780s and 1790s, once the Napoleonic Wars start flaring up, businesses again stifled. So between 1770 and 1785 in Europe, you have kind of this high point for European luxury goods, and the Röntgens are right in the middle of it, literally and figuratively. This is a close-up of one of the drawings that Elias Gervais would have supplied to the Röntgens. And this was from circa 1771, and is a scene from an Italian comedy. So the account books. Unfortunately, there aren't too many pages to the account books. There's 14 pages from the 1769 to 75 era. I'll get into that. Gervais earned about 36 Kreutzer per day for drawing work, which is equivalent to about 25 cents per day, as 60 Kreutzer equals 1 gulden. So if you take 5 divided by 12 divided by 60 times 36, you get 0.25. So that's how I came up with the 25 cents per day. Another kind of coin, stoivers were sometimes mentioned as kind of an accounting method. Just 3 kind of years, 71, 72, and 74, just some totals of what he's charging them. So 34 guilders, 50 guilders, and then 124 guilders. And that was really the apex of his relationship with the Röntgens. The Röntgen establishment generally paid Gervais within 2 weeks of being billed, which is extremely quick for this time period. Sometimes you see bills being opened for years, and sometimes even well and beyond one's death. But to get paid within 2 weeks, fairly consistency is really, really, really good for the 1780s. Only 3 pages exist from the 1782 to 1783 period, which is, if you've been paying attention to the Continental Dollar discussion, is the period that could potentially excite all of us. To the right here, we see a page from the account book from 1783. It's in French, no mention of a Continental Dollar, but that doesn't mean anything. So next document here, we have his life annuity contract. Again, 3 pages. This is actually written in Gervais' hand. He wrote it, signed it, and then other people kind of officiated it. It was signed on January 6, 1774, between Gervais and the Neuwied brethren. Gervais was to receive a free apartment for life with wooden candles, as well as 150 Frankfurt florins or guilders per year. He was to receive this annually on December 30th. In return, the brethren were to receive, quote, the proceeds of his entire work. His tools also become the property of the Moravian Church. This is actually extremely, extremely important if we're considering looking at the potential of Gervais making and producing the Continental Dollar moving forward after 1774. Again, he potentially made it in 1782, 1783. So by that point, all the proceeds of his work, including potentially that of the Continental Dollar, would have actually been the property and for the profit of the Moravian Church, if he went through it, if he made it. But it's really intriguing kind of clause to how his work was to be taxed and funded from that point forward. Gervais, quote, undertakes to work in his profession as much and as long as his strength allows him. So this is again 1774. We know that he worked at least through 1785. So that does again go into the 1782-83 period. Gervais to, quote, keep accurate books and accounts of all his profits and expenses in his profession, and will not make any trade or profit, nor frequent or substantial sale, barter, or purchase concerning his trade, which is not entirely to the profit of the house, and without the foreknowledge of the economist. That is very important as well. And again, it just further drives home the point that if Gervais is making this, it's not necessarily completely on his own. It's not necessarily for his own profit, perhaps, but there's something bigger going on here. The last page, Gervais, quote, surrenders to said fraternal house all his stamps, tools, instruments, machines, implements, materials, or anything present or future useful for his profession. Again, it's telling. It really is telling about his relationship, not only with the Moravian Church, but also with his own career moving forward from this point. There was an inventory drawn up on December 30th, 1773. Since this is about 10 years before he potentially would have made the Continental Dollar. Of course, there would be no mentions of that, but I couldn't find the inventory itself either. I just found mention of it. So Gervais was, quote, aware of his old age, his infirmities, and his shortage of work. So he's aging by this point, 1774. He's getting up there, but he's still working for another 9 years or so. I'm sorry, another 11 years or so. But under a kind of really, really interesting and telling circumstances with the Moravian Church in Neuwied. That same day, he draws up a testament, also given on January 6th, the same day as the previous documents, notes that Gervais has no heirs to his profession. Quote, considering that the house of the brothers, my residence, already famous as an engraver's dwelling, will take care to maintain this prestige, replacing me after my passing with people of my handicrafts. Those with my tools know how to make use of it in proportion to the value I place on it. So he's essentially officially giving over his tools to the Brotherhood at this point, with the promise that they will keep them and maintain them, and also essentially just continue his business for him after his passing. Again, the possessions to become the property of the Moravian Neuwied Church. Quote, for the reasons I resign and present my brother's house, all my tools, my instruments, machines, devices, materials, or anything that belongs to me now or in the future that can serve my profession. So this is really just reiterating what the first document said. However, on the condition that I can use the said things for my job as long as I will still need them. So again, he's given them over, but as long as he's around, he's still allowed to use them. The last page, or the last section, other personal effects. So furniture, clothes, jewelry, jewels, paintings, drawings, all that stuff that have no significant relationship to my profession, since these last mentioned things are things that I reserve the right to dispose of differently. So here we actually see that not all of Gervais' possessions did become the possession of the Moravian Church, just the tools and things that were deemed quote unquote essential to his profession. But it's kind of interesting because in his quote unquote other personal effects, we do see things like copper plate engravings, drawings, graphics. So things that could potentially be somewhat used in the profession. Finished things, so not necessarily the tools to make things, but the tools, but the things that have already been made. You know, what I'm hinting at here is potentially dyes and stuff like that may have been his own possession. So just because the Moravian Church had access to the profits of anything that Gervais did, didn't necessarily mean that they had access to all the tools and everything, because there are some things that he kept and retained as one of his own personal effects. December 31st, 1790, further stipulated, quote, before any division of my engravings is undertaken after my death, brother Antoine Favre will take the quote unquote battles of Ruglandray which was 41 pieces without prejudice to a share. So this is just kind of stipulating that he still has some kind of control over these personal effects and where they're going after his death. But for the most part, by this point, the Neuwied Church does have a fair amount of control over Gervais' dealings. So here's this death registry. The page on the left shows 2 death notices. His is the one on the bottom. See Elias Gervais. Just some facts that we can glean from this document. He died on March 20th, 1791. In Neuwied, he was unmarried. For the last 6 months of his life, he walked with crutches due to pain from gout. He lived 70 years, 1 month, 24 days, and then he was buried 3 days after he passed away. Prior to my trip to Germany, there was, Elias Gervais' name was being kind of tossed around as the potential engraver of the Continental Dollar, and there was some discussion online about when he died, whether it was 1791 or whether it was 1775 when he stopped working for the mints. But it's fair to say that 1791 is definitive. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever that he passed away in 1785. Is definitely 1791. So that's basically his biography as we know it, a brief synopsis of his biography as we know it right now. I'm going to give you some a brief introduction to some of the things he made. Again, he was a Petierstecher, a wax seal engraver. And here we actually have a wax seal that was engraved by Gervais. It's actually not the seal itself, but a wax stamping of the steel. So it's a German heraldry seal in wax. By the 18th century, heraldry was extremely, extremely popular in Germany, not only amongst the higher echelons of society, but even middle class and oftentimes lower class people were beginning to get their own heraldries at this point by paying for them, of course, not necessarily by earning them. So this is one of many, many, many forms of heraldry that were coming out at the time. I couldn't pinpoint exactly what family this would represent, but I'm sure the answer is out there somewhere. It portrays a helmeted shield topped by 4 6-pointed stars. The shield shows 3 6-pointed stars above a heart, above a crescent moon. There's an open wreath below, and then all of this is flanked by Rococo design elements. It was engraved by Gervais on December 21st, 1777. So very cool, in my opinion. Something that you don't see every day, 18th century seals, but at the same time, especially one that's been where we know who designed it and who engraved it. As I mentioned earlier, he made components of Runken furniture. Here's some close-ups. So here you can see the Runken and Kinzig clock dial on the left. Gervais is designing and engraving and stamping pretty much all the metallic elements that you see here, including the hands and stuff like that. So very important workshop for the Runken family and for the Runken manufactory. Here we can see on the right a close-up of a desk or a table. All those metallic components Gervais' workshop would have made as well. We can see close-ups of the paintings. Again, Gervais' workshop would have supplied the original paintings for the carpenters to reproduce out of wood. So all these kind of scenes that you see, I don't know if I mentioned this or drove the point home, but they're not paintings on the wood. They're actually little pieces of wood that are cut out in different colors and then put together like a puzzle to make this scene. But Gervais himself is painting them and supplying the carpenters with the scenes. These in the metallic components, you can see what look like metals. They actually were metals, or actually they were imitations of metals. So we do know that the Runken family did actually have a small collection of European metals and Gervais used those as inspiration for these various components. All right, so coins. E.g. fake it. Alicia Gallaudet was for the long time thought to be the E.g. of the Continental Dollar, from Eric P. Newman's 1950s work on this topic. But there's another E.g., obviously, Elias Gervais. So in the 1750s, 1760s, 1770s, Gervais made the dies for many, many coins in several locations. He used 3 different sets of initials, either G, EG, or EGF. F meaning fake it, which for those of you who don't know is Latin for made it. So this literally forms a little sentence that says Elias Gervais made it, or something along those lines. And it might sound simple to those who don't necessarily know this phrase, but it's very common in numismatics and other forms of work like this. He made coins and medals for Neuwied, Koblenz. As I mentioned, he was the mint master for them, but also dies for Bonn, Trier, Mainz, and Ellwangen. All of these are coins with the exception of the piece on the bottom right, which is a medal. But you can see the EG initials on all of them, right below the bust usually on the coins. As of now, I don't know of any definitive list that exists that lists all the coins that he made. They're kind of just scattered around. I mean, there's mention of them, but there's no kind of Elias Gervais curriculum vitae or CV or anything like that. So why do we think that Gervais made the Continental Dollar? How did this kind of come up? I mean, I'm going to be quick on this. There's articles that have been written over the past few years on both sides of this topic, but how did Gervais' name get kind of mixed up in this? Unfortunately, this image didn't necessarily come out as clearly as I would have liked, so it's a little bit blurry, but some of you might recognize this from either online or in numismatist articles written on this topic. But this is the book by Sarah Sophia Banks, who was a British coin collector in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, who owned one of these. And this piece of paper here that's kind of affixed to her book is supposedly kind of an advertisement sort of receipt sort of thing for the Continental Dollars. And in just above this, this is really the important part, but really what you can't see, it says that it was produced in Europe for sale in America. So that kind of was the first inclination within the past 10 years or so that first started getting people to think maybe this coin wasn't necessarily made in America. This image, or these 2 images, are from an article actually that I wrote that discusses the edge variations. The 3 edges on the left are of Continental Dollars, and the 3 images on the right are actually of coins from Germany. So coins from that were in the Americas at this time didn't have so striking similarities of edge devices as these. So this was further evidence that shows that these coins are probably not made in America, using stylistic similarities here. Just the kind of their fabric of these pieces are hinting towards a European place of manufacturing. And of course, the initials themselves. These, to the left, we could see 5 sets of initials. The 2 on the top and the 2 on the bottom are from Gervais made coins, and the one in the middle is from a Continental Dollar. So you can see the similarities there. But similarities, of course, isn't proof, but it's still something that's telling. And to the right, we have one of the Continental Dollars with his signature on it. You can see it just above the date. In the middle, E.g. fake it. Again, Elias Gervais potentially made it. So this is not necessarily new information. What I presented earlier about his life, that's a lot of that's on the newer side, but the fact that Gervais potentially made the Continental Dollar has been suggested in the past. This is a snapshot from a book from 1923 by Leonard Forer, the Biographical Dictionary of Metallists. And here we can see under Gervais' listing that the initials EG occur on a piece of American continental currency dated 1776, which may be by this engraver, E.G. Fake. So again, this isn't necessarily new information, but when Eric P. Newman came out with his 1950s monograph on it, it was so compelling that his kind of side of the story became fact, and all of this other potentials were lost. So it took several decades and generations of numismatists even to begin thinking about these earlier methods again. So this is kind of my in conclusion page to wrap everything up. If Gervais made the Continental Dollar, I kind of have two points here that I'd like to make. First is that he made it in Neuwied, Germany. So there was kind of contention, or some discussion about, even if Gervais made it, was it in Germany, was it in Switzerland, where was he at the time? He was in Neuwied at this time. He was aging. He had his own workshop. He wasn't traveling much at this time. He had early gouts, so he was in pain. He was in Neuwied in the 1780s. There's little to believe otherwise. This kind of narrows recent understanding down from in Europe, as the bank's kind of receipt says, or her book rather says, that it was produced, quote, in Europe, or somewhere in Germany or Switzerland. That's what I was operating under before I did this research trip, that it was somewhere in Germany or Switzerland. I wasn't too sure myself, but now I'm fairly sure that if he made it, again, if he made it, it was in Neuwied, Germany. So point two, if Gervais made the Continental Dollar, the Neuwied Moravian Church was involved. Again, I showed you those documents from 1774 that stipulates how Gervais' career is going to move forward beyond that point, and the Moravian Church was heavily involved with that. I don't know if you could say they were controlling or not, but they definitely had their hand in the pot, so to speak. They received any proceeds, any profits that would have been made on this. And if Sarah Sophia Banks's book that this dollar coin was, quote unquote, made in Europe for sale in America, hints at making profit. And as we saw, the profits would have gone to Neuwied Moravian Church. So the 1782-83 timeframe still works for this, as we know that Gervais worked until about 1785. If nothing else, the Neuwied Moravian Church received profits that were made from this. Was this a commission that they received? Was this a capitalist venture on their behalf? Is there anything else in their records on this coin, but not necessarily about Gervais himself? And the big question is, might the dies still exist to these? Again, the church owned a lot of the tools and production pieces for Gervais' career after 1774, but not necessarily all of it. Again, as we saw, he still retained some copper plates and stuff like that. But I'd like to, dream that there's a box in a church in rural Germany right now that has, half a dozen of Continental Dollar dies sitting in it, just waiting for someone to find them. So that's basically where I'm at with this. I wasn't necessarily sure, what I would get out of it, if I would come out with anything that progresses this conversation any further. I think that I have. If nothing else, I feel like I've narrowed down where kind of this camp of the conversation should look. The Neuwied Moravian Church is a compelling place to keep looking. They have a lot of documents. They really didn't throw that much out. From what I can tell, they were spared through World War II since they're smaller towns. So unlike a lot of these larger German cities, a lot of the documentation still exists there. So it's a clear potential that this is a place that that we should keep looking if we want to continue thinking that Gervais made the Continental Dollar. I have many people to thank. First, the Newman Numismatic Portal, of course, for hosting the symposium. Once again, the Eric P. Newman Numismatic Educational Society for allowing me to go on the research trip as through a grant that I applied for and received through them. A few of the places that I visited was the Röntgen Museum Neuwied, especially Director Bernd Wielscheid. He was an amazing person. I spent a great afternoon with him at the Röntgen Museum. He showed me their furniture, how it works, even like taking apart tables and how they operate and everything. It was a really great time. The archive der Brudergemein in Neuwied. This is the archive that we should put a few check marks next to, because that's the archive of the Neuwied Moravian Church. The Archives de Genève. This is the state archives in Geneva. They sent me a few documents. The Germanisches National Museum in Nuremberg. They're also very helpful. Of course, the American Numismatic Society. And of course, viewers like you. So we wouldn't be here without the desire and urge to share our information. So thank you for viewing, and thank you for everyone else for making this possible for me. So that's all I got. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and perhaps we have a few questions. I'm going to hand it back over to you, Len.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jesse. The findings isolating this to Neuwied and also the Moravian church tie-in, I think, are potentially quite significant. So good investigation. So we'll open up for questions. You can enter them into the Q&A. We've got a few questions already. First one, why isn't the Sarah Banks documentation not the smoking gun that the Continental Dollar was not made in US?
So it's not the smoking gun because it's made by someone else at a different place at a slightly different time. That's kind of working off a hearsay from one person. I mean, and even the mentioning of being made in America isn't on the receipt thing itself or the kind of flyer. It's written by a person's hand. So it's as close as we can get to a smoking gun at this point, but it's not necessarily a smoking gun. It doesn't say Elias Gervais made this in Neuwied, Germany in 1782 or 83. That would be a smoking gun. A receipt signed by Elias Gervais that said, hey, I made this for so-and-so on such and such date and received X amount of Kreutzer for it. That would be a smoking gun. But the Banks document, while not necessarily a smoking gun, is as close as we can get at this point.
All right, next question. Why would Gervais sign one die and not others?
This is a question that I actually was grappling with last night. And I am wondering if, if we saw those documents and he said that the Moravian Church owned all the tools and, when he passes, they'll find someone to fulfill his spot and so on and so forth. I'm almost wondering, now, this is complete, just, an idea, nugget, no evidence whatsoever. But I'm wondering if this was like almost a training project for him to teach his potential students. He signed one, the students did the others. I mean, the one that is signed, e.g. Fake It, is the highest quality as far as artistic design goes. All the rest are not so high quality. They look like they could be designed by a student. Things are misspelled on them. They could, they look like something that was made by someone who's not necessarily paying as much attention as a master engraver, sort of thing. So, I mean, that's just an idea I had last night. Why, I was grappling with that very same question.
Yeah, and then of course, you do have evidence that he took on apprentices. So
right, yeah.
It's significant. All right, next one. If these were made for profit, how many do you think were struck?
Well, recent modern estimates are in the low thousands, from what I understand, based off of the number of dies and about how long we think dies lasted for. I think the current understanding is something like 5,000 or 6,000 were made or something like that. So that's what I'm sticking to.
All right, next one. You've been careful to say if Gervais made the Continental Dollar dies. Based on your overall knowledge of the situation, how likely do you think it is that Gervais is the real die sinker? 50%, 90%?
Yeah, I'll just continue being careful and saying if he made it. No. I think that is. I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, so I'll go with 75%. But even my answer from why he signed one and not others kind of hinted at the fact that he only made one and not others. So so even if he did quote unquote make it, maybe he didn't even make all of them. Maybe he only made the one, and maybe he didn't even strike any of them. Maybe he only produced the dies, and so I'm still fairly confident that based off of stylistic observations, based off of the fact that the majority of these are pewter, and in 1782, 83, I mean, there's so many pewter metals and coins coming out of central Germany that I mean, I think that metallurgical analysis on a lot of these pewter specimens is something that needs to be done and hasn't been done yet. It very well could point to, hey, all of this pewter came out of this mine in central Germany, and there's no disputing that. So I think that's another kind of avenue that we need to take as more scientific approaches as well.
All right, next question. What is the context of the 1920s document that had previously identified or suggested Gervais as the engraver?
So that was a book that literally just lists engravers. I mean, it's got thousands and thousands of engravers. There's a biographical dictionary of engravers. A lot of the entries just say, an initial or a name and give one sentence of, so-and-so was an engraver at this place at this time. This one for Gervais is a little bit more detailed in that it does give the potential of two different pieces that he made, one being the Continental and another was a 1619 dated piece that I don't know if I haven't looked into that piece at all. But yeah, that was the context. So it was basically just a biographical dictionary of engravers.
Okay. And then, in terms of fingering Gervais in that context, as far as we know, that's just a speculation on the part of Leonard Ferré, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I think he was kind of, careful to say if or may have created this as well. I don't, he's kind of just connecting dots in his brain too. I'm imagining not necessarily having any.
So just because it's old, we shouldn't say it's significant because it was a speculation.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. Any thoughts on where or when Gervais would have received or seen the Fugio designs?
Well, there's a few places. I mean, he wasn't necessarily exactly in ground zero of this, but one of the most famous actors of the Revolutionary War were Hessian soldiers, were German soldiers who came, essentially missionaries, spent a few years in what became the United States, and then went back. And I'm sure that they took souvenirs with them. Not only that, as I mentioned during this period, especially 1775, 76, which is when these designs were being, the continental currency that the dollars were made of after, that's when they were made. I think the February 1776 issue or something like that. At that time, Gervais was heavily involved with the Runkins still, and the Runkins were shipping stuff mostly throughout the Europe, but also throughout the world. I mean, some of their stuff did make it to the Americas, so I'm sure that they did have access to various forms of money from including continental currency at one point. So,
right, and then weren't there a couple early publications with depictions of Fugio cents?
Yep. Yeah. Well, the Fugio cents would have been a little bit later, but there's some German depictions of the Continental Dollar, I think from 1783, where it's in German. Is that what you're talking about?
No, I'm just wondering, getting back to the original question, where would Gervais have gotten the design for the Fugios? So would he have had access to that in print
Right. Yeah.
prior to engraving the dies?
Yeah, it definitely would have been the currency and not the coin, because the coin didn't come out until 1787. So
Okay, all right, so that's later.
right.
Okay. All right, next question. Given that a large number were made and the expenses related to making them, do you find it unusual that the church does not have records of the manufacturer?
I don't, because I haven't gone through all the records yet.
Okay.
I'm just barely scratching surfaces over here. I mean, I requested to show me what they had on Gervais, and I mean, they gave me 2 folders, and that's what I went through. But you know, I'm sure that if the church was more heavily involved than just Gervais, then they do have records of it that don't make any mention of him whatsoever. So just the fact that I didn't find anything, even in the exact places that I went, doesn't mean that they don't exist in those places. They very well could be there still. And quite frankly, even up to like a few days ago, I was kind of content with doing this one research project. But as I'm compiling this, I'm like kind of becoming more and more intrigued about what they have, and wouldn't mind going back there at all and just, you know, just saying, let me start at the top and just start going through things and let me find what I want to find. So
yeah, and you know, the idea of the church running, you know, its own engraving business at that period, I mean, unless there was somebody in place to you know, run it for them, which is, it seems a stretch, but you know, who knows what's in the records.
yeah.
All right. Next one. Did Gervais use letter punches for the dies? If not, why not?
So that's part of the stylistic similarities that I found between Continental Dollars and some of Gervais' work, is that especially when it comes to very, very, very small letterings, like the ones that we see of all the states around the rings of the reverse of the Continental Dollar, he's using extremely small letter punches and then oftentimes going back and re-engraving them with hand or by hand. So if you look at a Continental Dollar under a microscope, or even at, you know, on Heritage's website and just zoom in really far, you'll actually be able to see that he's using punches and that certain letters do look exactly the same in some elements, but then he goes back and strengthens them for whatever reason. I don't know if it's, you know, just to make them, you know, stylistically, to just to make sure that they're all properly engraved or whatever, but he is using both punches and then hand engraving at the same time.
Well, they're really mushy on a lot of pieces, so it you know, it totally makes sense. He would have used punches and then touched them up.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. All right. No more questions. So if anyone has any last minute questions, this is the time to enter them.
And I would like to mention that this is kind of like a work in progress at this point. I mean, I do hope, or not hope to, but I am going to write this up, and it will not only be in hopefully the next issue, or really I should say 2 issues from now, of the Journal of Early American Numismatics, but we'll also of course be on the Newman Numismatic Portal for everyone to view.
All right. One comment, excellent research. So, and I definitely agree that the main findings about Gervais are useful here, and hopefully there's more in the same source. Usually when you go do a research trip like this, you end up with a lot more questions than you started with. But exactly. I still think those 2 findings are potentially significant. All right. Next thing, can you remind us of what you mentioned a moment ago about the German image of the Continental Dollar?
So there's an engraving. I want to say it's circa 1784 or something like that, and it's an engraving from a German source of a Continental Dollar. So it looks exactly like a Continental Dollar, except all the legends are in German instead of English. No coin like this exists. Or should I say did exist, because modern kind of reproductions based on this engraving have been made in the past year or so. But you know, no genuine 18th century product of a Continental Dollar in German exists, except for in an engraving, which is extremely early. It's the earliest known mentioning of a Continental Dollar if they're making them in New York or Philadelphia, why weren't they mentioned there? Why are they all of a sudden first mentioned in Germany?
And so that engraving is really sort of the key piece of evidence right now that points toward Germany, correct?
Yeah,
All right. All right. Next question. If Gervais used letter punches, do we see them on his other dies as well?
I started to look into this, and there are similarities. I haven't found exact die punch links at this point, but also the last coins that he made were circa 1775, 76 official coins for the mint. And then we're not seeing the Continental dollars for another 6 or 7 years. So it's potential that he used a different set of punches at this point, or, was just operating with a different set of tools this many years later, or even, that the sizes were different or something like that. The short answer is no, we haven't found a die punch link yet. But that's something that we want to look out for. Also, kind of going off of this is also, I showed the images of the edges. The edges will also be very important. If we find any a German-based coin with an exact edge design as one of the Continental dollars, then of course that's extremely significant, because it will help kind of pigeonhole it into a specific mint or period of time.
Yeah. Now you on one of the slides had depicted a number of his other coins and medals. Is that the extent of it, or do you think there's more out there that could be useful for comparison purposes?
Of his coins and medals? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I see there's a comment that's mentioned that, essentially shows the source of one of the images. So the image that I used of, I think there were 5 different initials that actually did come from an eSylum publication from last year. And I think even in that eSylum publication is where it's kind of questions the date of his death. Was it 1775? Was it 1791? But fairly certain. I'm certain it's 1791.
All right, and we have another comment here. In 1777, American paper currency is documented to have been depicted in a German publication. This is in the eSylum from last year. That's interesting, because you have this paper money clearly produced in America, shows up in a German publication. So there's a communication path there.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, just because things are happening and in one place doesn't mean that other people in other places aren't privy to them and don't know, even when it comes to material culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Next one. Any connection to or between Gervais and the German publication in which the image of the German language engraving appeared?
That I don't know yet.
Okay.
I haven't looked into that at all.
Yeah, so I can't remember where that particular publication was published, and so
for some reason I'm seeming to recall that was it like near Berlin, or was it kind of like northeastern part of Germany? I can't recall either, but I'm not sure. But as we saw, I mean, Gervais, he was a mover and a shaker. We think of these people as being rather stationary, but people did move around. So, even if something was published, even up to a couple 100 miles away, that it's still within the realm of possibility that there were some sort of connection between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know that, well, at least within America, publications or newspapers traded content all the time. So it got around.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So I think that may be it on the questions. Thanks for being on today and sharing this new information.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's always, I know it's a lot of work to go travel to these places and then dig around all the archives and then, produce some clarity out of all that work. So, but I think this is really good. So thanks again.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, my main goal with this was just to help, progress this conversation a little bit, and hopefully I or someone else can figure this out in the near future.
All right, we'll wrap it up there. The video will be available in 2 to 3 weeks. All the registrants will receive an email with links to the videos from all of the NNP Symposium presentations. And thanks for attending, and thanks again, Jesse.
Thank you so much.
All right, see you later.